From Bosstrack, it's Her HypeSquad, a show about amazing women who've made incredible strides as leaders in their industry. They're here to support you and your leadership growth, to encourage you and hype you up as part of your Hype Squad. Hello everyone, this is Michelle Harris bringing you another episode of Her Hype Squad with Bosstrack. This week I sat down with Yvette Durazo, CEO of Unitive Consulting and author of Conflict Intelligence Quotient, Conflict IQ, the missing piece to turbocharge conscious leaders and organizations' emotional intelligence. We talk about conflict IQ, negotiating for what you want or need at work, active listening, and resolving conflict. Before we get into our conversation, I'd like to share a little bit about Yvette. Yvette Durazo, author of the book Conflict Intelligence Quotient, Conflict IQ, is the founder of Unitive Consulting, specializing in workplace effectiveness, conflict management, and leadership development. With a master's degree in conflict resolution, negotiation, and peacebuilding from California State University, Dominguez Hills, Yvette holds a PCC coaching credential from the International Coaching Federation. She brings innovative techniques to promote positive workplace cultures, trust, and inclusion. Services offered include conflict mediation, training, anti-bullying prevention, settlement negotiations, and addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Yvette is a former consultant at Santa Clara County experienced in change management and conflict transformation. Additionally, she serves as a professor at various universities and actively participates in ADR associations and the wellness community. If you enjoy my conversation with Yvette, be sure to subscribe to our channel and help more people find us by sharing this episode with others or by leaving a review. Or subscribe to our weekly newsletter filled with things we found that we're excited about and were inspired by, along with valuable leadership advice to watch, listen to, or read. It's a little bit of joy for your inbox each Monday. You can subscribe at www.thebosstrack.com/weeklyjoy. Now, without further delay, here's my conversation with Yvette Durazo. Well, hello, Yvette. Thank you so much for joining us here on Her Hype Squad with Bosstrack today.
Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me over to your podcast and to visit your audience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation and digging into your book. But I'd love to start by you sharing a little bit about yourself with the audience and maybe talking about a little bit what you do relative to what we're going to be getting into, which is conflict management.
Sounds good. Well, a little bit about me is that I was born in between the borders to Tijuana and San Diego. So I am Latina and I do speak Spanish as well, as you can hear an accent in there. I was born at a family of 7. So you can only imagine that I had to learn from the cradle to learn how to mediate and negotiate, especially with when being the youngest of 7. I was first generation graduate of a master's degree of all my family. And the master's degree that I earned was in negotiation and conflict management and peacebuilding. And that is how the journey started about developing my consulting business and also about writing a book in conflict intelligence, based not only on the educational portion of it, but also of my experiences regarding leadership, starting from my father all the way from me, going and working in the private sector and having my own personal experience of toxic managers.
Yeah, I love that you bring up that example of your background of being the youngest of, it was seven kids?
Yes. Yeah,
because a lot of people think of negotiation and conflict management as something that is related to some kind of a business deal or something that is not out of reach of what we're dealing with every day, but it's really not. It is helpful to know how to deal with that in everyday life situations and as we're talking to women leaders in your leadership position and working with teams and working with different people in the organization.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that women overlooked, that it's so critical and important to have those skills, because the truth of the matter is that we learn how to negotiate and resolve conflict through our well-meaning parents that brought us in, right? We learned this through social transmission. Perhaps a good mentor, your elementary teacher might teach you some certain skills. Don't realize that you go into the workplace and you don't have new or updated skill sets. You bring back whatever you learned when you were young, and perhaps it's not going to help you as much when you're working at a professional level, or it's going to go against you, especially when they want to negotiate salary, for example, because of the background, the way we're brought up as women. For example, men are more typical to grow up in an environment that it's a normal thing to negotiate, right? To do these type of negotiations, versus in women, we tend to use more empathy in negotiating, and we don't address our needs whenever we're negotiating for salary. So every day we wake up every morning and we deal with our own personal conflict, external conflicts that we have. We negotiate ever since we wake up every morning.
Yeah, I want to dig into your book a little bit, but I was curious if do you ever talk with women about negotiating for salary? Like, do you have any helpful tips there for people that might actually be getting ready to do that or thinking about approaching their employer about that?
Yeah, I do work with a lot of women that are already in the mid levels of their career, and they want to go up the ladder. And I teach them negotiation skills. And one of the first things I work with them is to create awareness of what is it that they have been programming to think. Because if I skilled the person prior to doing that, they're not going to feel comfortable or assertive enough to use the skills. So I have to work on the mentality first, then help them with the skills and help them with behavioral modification in order for them to feel more comfortable in doing negotiation. I do have an entire good list of questions that talks about how not to land a toxic environment, because that is one of the things that we never think of, that when we go into a job interview, we don't think about that. They're not interviewing us only. We also have to interview the company to see whether we're going to be in a good environment and where there's fertile grounds in order for us to grow our career. So I did one sheet that talks about questions on what to ask, and it's on my website. But I'm more than happy to, if people contact me, I'm more than happy if they mention your podcast, I can give them a code so they can download it for free. But, these are ways that I try to empower and work with women in order for them to negotiate, and not only to negotiate salary, but also negotiate space on the table when they have to work on projects and raise their voice on things that they have done. Because it's very common to hear women that they come out with ideas and all of a sudden somebody else takes their ideas, especially a man, right? Or a man takes credit for their ideas.
Yeah. What do you suggest that people say when that happens? Because I know I've talked to people about that exact scenario, like they're in a meeting, because we've talked about what happens, where can bias exist, and where can those issues be. And that comes up so often. And do you have is there like a magic response that you can say in those meetings when things like that happen?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have that magic wand to say you can do this. And every single situation is very distinct. Why? Because the characters in the situation are very distinct, right? I have worked with women to empower them to have a communication with this other person. And that other person has created awareness, has negotiated and worked with the other person not to do that, and then eventually work well professionally, right? But it all depends on the other person as well. If I hear that the other person, it's a person that is in a very high position, nobody's gonna take them out of that thinking. That's the way that he or she leads that would be very tough. I would start either helping that individual or that woman to manage the situation or to start looking for ways to finding other opportunities within the organization or perhaps outside. Mm-hmm. So it all depends. It all depends on the situation. It all depends on the character involved. It all depends on the structure of the organization, where in the structure that person is, so that I can provide some coaching around what to do about that. Yeah. But in all of those spaces, women feel empowered because they find, first of all, they find a space where to vent. They find a space where to think clearly. And then they found a space in where they can be coached in an environment in where they know best and how our things are going to work better for them. Right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of times we do give very generic responses, but you're right. Context matters so much, and who it is that's actually creating that conflict can be a big factor in how you respond. So I understand there really isn't necessarily a cookie cutter answer to that.
Yeah, I actually saw somebody post a video. One of my colleagues posted a video about a similar situation, and his response was very generic. And the reality is that conflict is very insidious. All situations are different, just like every single brain is different. Therefore, yes, the skill sets will help you a lot, but then you have to really see the scenario, see the situation. And sometimes people are so close emotionally to what's happening with them that it can be of a lot of value to bring somebody to talk to, or a third person, or a neutral third person that has nothing to do of their environment, so that, that they can help them objectively to see what is in the best interest to them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that. I know we went off on a little separate direction there, but
no problem. This is very important. Every single topic that I deal with, that when it comes to humans, communications, conflict, negotiation, bullying, and all of that, it's of a lot of value and a lot of need to give resources and information, and for people to know that there's people like me that specialize in this field. I'm not the only one. There's a field study that it's here in order to support them before alternating to going into an attorney, before going into formal complaints. There's people here that can support you and work with you, and that are skilled enough to give you the value that you need in order to move forward in the situation that you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd love to move to your book, and your book is Conflict Intelligence Quotient. And can you explain what is conflict IQ?
Yes, the conflict IQ, it was a download in a night that I couldn't sleep. I actually, running your own business, you probably, Michelle, can attest to this. Sometimes we spend a lot of time building, marketing the business. And one day I was thinking about my experiences, that I had already had with professionals, working with them, and questioning about the fact that there were people that I was working with that, so they have a good, fair level of emotional intelligence, but yet they were still fearing having those difficult conversations, not sleeping at night, worrying every hour of the day that they were going to have to talk to these people that they don't know how to have those difficult conversations, so that they don't want to deal with the individual that it's making them emotionally angry or upset, right? So I was already working with a lot of people, and I realized, I said, okay, when I work with these people, some of these have good emotional intelligence. I realized that they come out of the coaching session or the mediation session way better. So something happens to these people that they become extremely more equipped than they were coming in. So that is where the word conflict intelligence came about. And throughout the experiences, and just also having an experience with my father, that he was a very good leader with no education whatsoever. He barely went to second grade. But I had that great experience with him. And then having my own personal experience, I said, there has to be a certain level of intelligence that people can gain in order to be able to lean into conflict and be able to be good leaders. And that is the idea behind this book, that if I can contribute in any way possible to an organization, to have good leaders that lean into situations, uncomfortable situations, and they are able to maneuver and handle these situations. Those are the type of leaders that you want to have in the organization. And those are the type of leaders that others will follow, right? Mm-hmm. If you, Michelle, think about leaders that you in the past have worked with, which are the ones that you would follow? Mm-hmm. What are the traits of those leaders that you would follow, would have?
Yeah. Are you actually asking me that? Or
yes, I am. I cannot ask your audience because this is going to be recorded, but I can ask you because I'm pretty sure every single person on your audience, if they go back and think about what traits did that leader that I follow, that I admire had, what traits were those?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you said emotional intelligence and somebody who is willing to say what they should say, because I've been in so many situations and it feels like that person is very weak when they struggle to be honest and tell somebody what they really feel about something or give the feedback that's hard to give. I think that is something that I think has been missing a lot in the leaders that I've worked with. So from seeing that, I mean, that's something that to have a great leader that I feel great about working with, having the ability to be open, honest, and have those conversations with me or with the people around us. And I think that's so important. But I mean, of course, somebody who is very interested in creating a culture and creating a team environment. I mean, those are all, I think, those givens that you want to find in a leader.
Exactly, right? And for that leader to be created, it has to have the ability to not only be selfless, being a servant leader, but also have an ability to have a lot of skills that would allow them to have these type of conversations and be able to show up as a person that can handle those things. Mm-hmm. So that is what the book is all about. The book is not necessarily only to give skills. It is about how can you transform an individual from within in order to become it. The idea is to create leaders that become conflict intelligent. Mm-hmm. And in order to become conflict intelligent, there has to be a series of work within themselves, and then we skill them behavioral modification so that they can become it. And they can be at any point in their life and where situations are not working very well, and they can lean in and they can work with the situation and with people. You don't know how many times at this side of my screen, I hear and I see the same pattern over and over and over again. General managers, supervisors, managers, not wanting to deal with problems and sending their direct reports to deal with the problem. Mm-hmm. They overlook the problem. They don't want to deal with the problematic person. And they're just hoping that they're going to get to another position and leave that problem to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because they just don't want to deal with the situation. Because it takes time, it takes energy, and they just don't know how to go about doing this. Mm-hmm. And then in the middle of it, it's affecting everybody. It's creating toxicity in the workplace. And then all of these wonderful things in the mission statement of organizations and the culture of the organization goes out the window because the employees are not experiencing the purity of that mission because of these leaders that don't want to do anything about problems with people because they just want to leave it in there thinking that it's just going to go away. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go away. People are human beings. People have memories. If somebody in the workplace that you just don't like You're going to continue working with that person. You're just going to continue not liking them. And things are going to escalate through months and years just because you don't like that person.
Yeah.
And if that does not get resolved and work with people so that they can find amicable ways to work professionally, this is gonna continue in the workplace, and it's gonna affect the entire toxicity of the culture. And we don't want that. I was just minutes ago talking with somebody in a very known hotel industry that are dealing with these type of problems. In the general manager does not want to do anything about it, just because I'm pretty sure that person doesn't know how to deal with the conflict. They're expecting that it's going to go away. They're directing their direct reports to deal with it. And at that level, sometimes, like whenever I was mentioning that it all depends on the situation, depending also on the power structure, if you're going to request somebody else to go and deal with the situation and deal with the peer, sometimes it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. There has to be an environment and a process in order for it to work. And that is where I see that it's missing in organizations. That awareness is missing because for many, many years, companies were only focused on performance. People skills were not even talked about. They were not even taken in considerations. I still get the phone calls or the emails that companies want a 1-hour conflict resolution class. They don't realize that conflict resolution does not work in a 1-hour course. Yeah. You really need to invest in your employees in order to become conflict intelligent, because that is going to benefit the bottom line of the organization.
Yeah. Without giving away your whole book, what are some of the things that are helpful in building conflict IQ? What are some of maybe the overarching things that you talk about?
Yeah, well, I share in the beginning of the book, not an idea, but the quote of Albert Einstein: you cannot resolve the conflict from the level of consciousness and where it was created. So we need to learn how do we function from within out in order to be able to understand our reactions. What are the good things that we do in order to de-escalate conflict that we probably don't even know or haven't realized? What are the bad things or behaviors that you do that tend to escalate conflict that you need to create awareness of? You really need to know yourself better through personality assessments, be able to understand how is it that you react to conflict. How many people here in your audience, if I were to ask, they would know right away how is it that they deal with conflict? Nobody stopped to think, how is it that I really deal with conflict, right? Most likely people would say, well, I try to avoid it. A lot of people do that. Mm-hmm. But then there's other varieties of ways of how people deal with conflict, right? If we don't understand how is it that we deal with conflict, why is it that we deal with conflict in that way, right? We're not going to become good conflict resolvers.
That's right? So true.
We're not. Yeah. We're just not. We're going to just continue to putting those conflicts in a place in our brain where, it's kind of going to go away. It might resolve by itself, and thinking good wishes about, in the insidious human conflict.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not going to go away. People can survive and work in an environment in where that is the status quo already, that there's a conflict in there, and they try to avoid it, but they don't realize that it's really costing the organization. Mm-hmm. And the leaders tend to believe that is the human resource, the staff or the professionals that have to deal with that type of conflict. But then you find a lot of HR people that are not equipped with these type of skills either. Right. They only know policies and procedures and whatever they're being dictated by the legal counsel. And that's the way that they deal with people. And at the end of the day, you ended up losing a lot of money because you have to let go of a lot of people.
Right.
And then you ended up having a lot of months and years of silent quitters because they're not dealing well with other people in the workplace, and they're just going and dragging their feet, not performing well, just going for the paycheck. In the meantime, they find something new or elsewhere to work.
Yeah. That's one of the things that you bring up in the book is about how conflict can lead to a leaky bottom line. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yes, and a lot of leaders don't realize this because how much, I don't know if you know, Michelle, or you have been in the HR industry, but how much does it cost to fire and hire new people?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have read studies. It can be as much as like 70,000, 100,000 for like high level executives.
Yes.
Way more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it usually costs you about 30% of the salary of the person that you're letting go. And that includes that bringing the new person and waiting about 3 or 4 months in order, or maybe 6 months sometimes, in order for that new person to get a hold of the new system, learning how the company works and all of that. And you have to start a new cycle and everything gets stopped and everything goes lower because of that. And on top of that, we're not even taking in consideration all of the months and years that person that you probably ended up getting rid of was sabotaging somebody else's work, sabotaging their work, being a pest and not performing well, all of those months. And if you calculate in hours how much that is, and then that person, how it impacts everybody else, the bystanders, it's a lot of money. And that is something that organizations don't even pay attention to. And that is what I'm hoping that they can create awareness into creating. I always say companies should create a line item in their budget to deal with these type of things. To this hour of the day, companies don't have that.
Yeah.
Don't create that. Sometimes they ended up taking the money out of training and development, which is okay, especially if I'm going to go and give training. But if I have to go and give coaching and mediation, they said, we don't have any idea. We don't have any budget, but we're just going to pull it because this is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to once you kind of understand how you respond to conflict, are there steps to then figure out your personal way that you should then deal with conflict? Do you walk people through that in your book?
Well, I have an assessment that helps you to identify whether if you have good or medium or very low conflict intelligence. I also work with other assessments that I help people to identify what is their personality styles when dealing with assessments. What is their go-to way of dealing with conflict? That's another assessment that I also use. There are several assessments that I work with people in order to make them aware of within themselves, in order to help them, to equip them. If I don't create that awareness, I'm not going to be able to create a new viewpoint.
Right.
That eventually that viewpoint will become something that they do often and often and often. It becomes part of their personality. Our personality is only that. Our viewpoints that we created into values and beliefs that we for years and years and years keep repeating to ourselves, and that creates our personality, right? So I have to dismantle that in order to get in and be able to help them become more conflict intelligent when I bring about the skill sets, the behaviors, and all that.
Right. Understand. I'm curious if you'd mind sharing, is maybe you have a personal experience of a negotiation where maybe it didn't go as planned and what some of the key takeaways, like what can go wrong in a negotiation, or maybe if it's not a personal situation, something you observed that people listening can kind of learn from?
Yes, definitely. There are techniques into negotiation. And when I work with people one-on-one to help them to negotiate things, I help them to realize what is it that they can negotiate And what are the other things that you can negotiate that you can live with? Mm-hmm. That would be called BATNA, the best alternative to your negotiation. Mm-hmm. What is it that in the negotiation process, things don't go exactly 100% the way that you wanted it to be, but then you realize I can live with this, right? You have to be aware of that before you go into a negotiation. You have to do your homework. You also have to be aware of what is it that you will have to walk away from? What is it that you cannot sustain in order to say yes to something? That is your what. That's the abbreviation of what you need to walk away from. So when I suggest when people are going to go into a negotiation, to think about before going in, prepare yourself. Think about what is it that you can walk with and that's going to be okay, that you can maneuver and say, okay, I can survive with this. And what is it that you would say, no, I don't want to deal with this. I'd rather walk away from it, right? And what are the other positions or other things that you can negotiate? That is very important. And try to be a good listener.
Yeah.
Because when you're a good listener, you're going to understand what are the needs of the other person. Yes. Instead of just negotiating on the position.
Yeah. Listening is across the board such an important skill for a leader, and active listening. And we all get in the mode sometimes of thinking about what we want to say next, and our brain wanders. And by the time a few seconds go by and all of a sudden we lost the whole conversation of what the other person's trying to tell us. I think that's generally human nature, but I think for leaders, most importantly, I mean, everybody really, they really need to have that awareness, like a very heavy awareness on that listening aspect and being very conscientious about that.
Yes, that is another skill. That's why I said in order to bring about a good leader that is conflict intelligence, there's meta skills, many skills that need to be learned. But like I said, in order to install those skills, we need to upgrade the brain. And I talk about that in the book as well. And why is it important to do that before just pouring in and putting in some skill sets in there? And you said something very important here, that listening skills, people take it for granted. We are equipped, our body is equipped in order to do active listening, but we just sometimes don't know how to use our own equipment. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth, and listening, it's just not involved just being a good listener. I have been in situations that I have seen people's ears move because they're very good about listening.
Wow.
It's because I live in this world. I live in this world of mediation. I live in the world where I train people, where I develop people in mediation, where I go and give feedback in mediation. It's so interesting. I even have seen people that their ear moves, like when you see a dog, when the ear moves, when they're like, I've seen that on people. But listening is just not only be still and listening. It involves your entire body language. Mm-hmm. When you're genuinely listening to somebody else, the other person will not only see it, they will feel it, they will observe it.
Yeah.
And that is what creates trust on the other person to let go guards and open up.
Yeah.
And when they do, that is where we touch humanity. That is where we can find ways and mechanisms to dialogue more deeper state.
Yeah, that's so
when
true.
When people don't hear themselves, they don't have the ability to listen to others. The other person sees it, feels it, and then they shut down or they create barriers. They bring out their barriers.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, it's lower barriers. Good leaders, conflict intelligent leaders, know how to do this. Know how is it that the psychology of people work. They understand also how is it that in society we influence each other, right?
Yeah.
So not only do we need leaders that understand companies, organization, what is it that they do, services and everything. But the higher they go on rank, the more they're going to have to lead people. And the better it will be for the entire organization for those leaders to know how to lead people well.
Yeah.
At that level of the game, it is not so important for that person to understand and know every single detail of how supply chain works. At that level of the game, that person needs to be well skilled of how is it that people function.
Yeah.
Not only in themselves, but in a group. And that is going to help the company do well, because if employees feel good about a leader, they're going to feel that they belong. They're going to feel like, that they have a place that they can bring in their whole humanity in it, and then be able to have situations that they can go and talk and have somebody to support them, to be able to be the person that can listen to them, be neutrally involved in situations where they can help others in the workplace communicate better.
Yeah, that's
work
so
better together.
true. It's so true. I'm curious, a lot of leaders obviously are working with teams, and then there's conflict. They can run into conflict like within their team.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything different that you would say is important in resolving conflict between people on your team versus just between you and somebody else?
Well, it all depends. If you're working on a team, and let's say, for example, I'm a project manager, and all of a sudden they gave me about 20 people to work with. These are people that I'm not supervising. That's why I feel so bad for project managers, because they sell them the idea that they're going to manage projects, and they go through an entire pin book, right, at that thick, of how to use Gantt charts. And I am also certified as a project manager. That's why I know. And they sell them the idea that they're going to manage projects. But in the end of the day, what they're really doing, they're managing people. And it's worse because they're not the supervisors of those people. They're not the managers, right? The managers, supervisors are somebody else that they're just lending you the employee in order to work on that project.
Yeah.
So what I always say to the project managers is, you really need to realize what type of conflict that it is. And also be strategical to understand how is it that it's affecting everybody else. If it's a situation that is being dealt with a couple of people, but it's not affecting the performance on everybody else, it's not affecting the deadline. And let's say, for example, you're going to be working on the project for a couple of more months. As a project manager, I would suggest that that's okay. That's a good space where you should avoid situations. It's not affecting the other people around. It's not affecting the project. It's not affecting the deadline. And eventually these people are going to go back to their immediate managers, right? But if it's a situation is where people are being affected because of the fights and problems, that is where a project manager can be suggested to be like a neutral third party that should be having these type of conversations with them. But again, project managers are not skilled in having these difficult conversations. They're not skilled on how to mediate situations, and they just don't know how to deal with it. And they don't want to go to HR, right? Because HR, it's a red flag. And then they feel like, if I go to HR, they're going to think that I don't know how to deal with it. But in reality, nobody knows how to deal with these situations.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, if they're not skilled, if they didn't go to classes or have good ways of dealing with situations.
Yeah, you brought up a good point. So, with project managers, do you think that their first step, if it is affecting the project, if they have the skills, do you think their first step should be to try to address it, to bring the two parties together, or understand where the conflict lies and try to take that step? Or, what do you think would be the right approach for somebody in that situation?
Well, I think in that situation, a project manager, if they're skilled enough and they feel confident enough, they can go ahead and address that and say, you know what, overall, this is the situation. This is how it's affecting everybody, and this is how it's affecting the project. If we don't work things out, I understand, I'm not asking you to be friends or anything, but if you don't find amicable ways to work professionally, it's going to affect the project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the project manager's priority is to make sure that project gets done on time, right?
Right.
But let's say the situation continues, right? Then is when the project manager has to elevate this to the managers of these people so that they can have a conversation together. Mm-hmm. And perhaps also the project manager can be involved at one point so that the managers deal with the situation. But then if you have managers that don't know how to deal with the conflict, they're just not going to look the other way. They're just not going to meet with these people, or they're just going to meet and hopefully it will work or not. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, then the manager has to deal and take this to HR.
Yeah. And I guess
HR, it's a mechanism, carrot and a stick.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we do a performance evaluation. If you don't perform well, we're going to get rid of you. But they never address the problem. And then it perpetuates the situation because then the people don't take responsibility of their actions and they get angry between themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking that, you gave the example of the project manager, but I think if you are a leader and you're leading a team and you are that manager, and it's just an everyday situation where two people on your team have conflict, it's really the same approach, right? It's really understanding what is going on with each person and explaining to them how it's impacting the team effectiveness, the morale. And but I guess as a manager, you have a little more leverage because you have more control over their careers versus if you're a project manager and you don't have that leverage.
Yeah, but a lot of managers will just send the peers to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And that doesn't work sometimes because at that level, the power balance between these two people, sometimes it will not work because they're lazy. Managers, either they're lazy, they don't have the skills, they don't want to deal with it. And it's like, well, I'm just going to have them deal with the situation without understanding what is going on. Right? Without understanding what is really going on.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help. That doesn't help.
And if they don't have the skills for conflict resolution, why do they assume that their people on their team have that skill? How do they expect that to work out between the two? That's
I have a personal experience where because I had a master's degree in that area, I was being sent out to deal with a situation that should have had been dealt with the manager, and the manager just didn't want to deal with it. The manager sent me to deal with a situation and where it involved policies and procedures, and she didn't want to do the work. And that perpetuated anger into this person and years of anger because that person didn't want to do anything about it. It was a situation where this person was smoking, the what is it, the electrical cigarette.
The vape,
The vape inside the organization, inside the office. And eventually I ended up getting sick. Mm-hmm. But at that time, research had not even shown that was toxic. Mm-hmm. A year or 2 years later, that came about that indeed it creates toxicity. So even though that, that the research wasn't there, that was something to deal with policy. If a person, policies have been in place that nobody should be smoking inside an office. Same thing with the electrical cigarettes. So I did my best that I could to talk to this person, but I knew that I was defeated already because if the manager, who is the manager, shouldn't have come and say, you know what, based on policy, you need to get at least out of the department to go and smoke or do this and this and that. I was already in a position of powerless.
Right.
Because it was not something to do with, a small project that we were working together and maybe perhaps there was a different opinion of how to do things. No, this involves something serious. I became sick off of that Obviously, I could not prove it, and I could not go to the doctor, although the doctor signed in a letter for me. And guess what? I was the problem person. I became the problem person, right? So I dealt with that situation, and I became sick out of being in an environment where I was smelling that toxic fumes. And it was very bad. It was a very bad situation with me because I could barely go up the stairs. And even though that I would talk to this person and say, I'm sick, I'm dealing with this, I actually got to the point that I ended up with a pneumonia, to the point that I was going to eventually had a heart surgery because I ended up with constrictive pericarditis. I was lucky enough, God bless, that I was able to get rid of that surgery. But it's also a huge surgery. Imagine that. Imagine. It was something very serious. So whatever I'm talking on the book, I'm just not coming out of me researching and learning everything from a degree or all my certificates that I have, because I do have a whole bunch of other certificates in this area because I wanted to become a subject matter expert. Right. I'm also bringing this because I lived these things firsthand, and I know how is it that HR will deal with these type of situations and will get rid of the person that is the least problem that they can, that they're not going to get into a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And even when I went and talked to the attorney and said, you have it, you should be looking for another job position.
Wow. Oh, so yeah, that's.
I know.
Yeah, it's like speechless on.
But you know what? I got the opportunity to develop my consulting work, and here I am and doing all this work, right? And that is why I'm very passionate about this, because I know firsthand what it means to be in a very toxic environment and working in toxic environments. I also have my stories about bullying as well. So I know firsthand.
Yeah.
And not only do I know firsthand how to work with the bully, but also with the other person, because I also did my own work. Sometimes we, as people of very empathic personality, we become doormats if we don't know how to deal with these situations, and we attract environments like this because we don't ask the right questions. We think everybody's a nice person, and we just go with it, right?
Yes.
So with all of that, I learned how to empower people, how to help them, ask the right questions whenever they're going to go and apply for a job, how to deal with a situation like that, right? So that it doesn't affect you in your health. Because at the end of the day, conflict that is not resolved in the appropriate way, in the humanistical way, it's going to affect your health. And this is another thing that companies don't realize. If you have more people calling in sick, not wanting to work, always not feeling well and performing less because they're not feeling well, the insurance company will start charging more to the company. The insurance not only will go up to the person, but it will go up to everybody else.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of leaking things happening in companies because they just don't want to address the conflict, because they think performance, no matter what, performance. And that is what it tends to happen. They bring in leaders because of their performance all the way up, but they're not skilled in people.
Yeah. And I know we talk about being sick and employees calling in sick, but a lot of that times that's driven by anxiety and things that are happening in the workplace. And I think that's what you were saying. And it all comes back to the leader and knowing how to lead effectively and be emotionally intelligent, being conflict intelligent. And there's actually so much more we could talk about, and even going into bullying. And I wish we had more time. And I know we're really running out of time, but if you have a few minutes, I'd love to ask you a few of the standard questions we ask all of our guests.
Definitely. I have.
Great. Okay. I'm curious, do you have a mentor that you attribute some of your success to in your career?
Well, I always surround myself with people that I learned from. This field of work that I'm at, it's a field of work that you're constantly learning. And I'm a life learner, by the way. It's one of that part of me and my personality that I'm constantly learning from books, from people, and I'm always open to finding the right mentors. And I think that my strongest mentor, that it's on the back of this book, was my father.
Mm-hmm.
He was my biggest mentor because he gave me the experience of what a great leader could be. And a great leader with no education, no elementary graduation, middle, high school, no education. So because of that, I feel that there's no excuse for not having good leaders in organizations. We should have great leaders because we have people that have already gone through an educational process, that have skills. So we can build these great leaders. The educational system, most likely than not, it's not the right combination of things that will create a good leader. It is their humanity. It is their people skills that are going to bring the best out of a great leader in an organization.
Yeah.
So that if that answers your question, that is my biggest mentor. But like I said, I have other mentors in my field of work. I always look for those that have done a great job in this field, because the field work that I'm at is not new. It has been there for a long time, but it has been overlooked because companies for many years fall into that idea that performance, no matter what, right? Because of the research that was done, that was the most important thing. So I always look for other mentors in my field that are doing great jobs, that are succeeding in my field of work as well.
Yeah. Do you have a routine that you follow daily, whether it's in the morning, evening, that you attribute your well-being, your mental well-being to?
Yes, I stick to my gratitudes in the morning and at night, because you need some fuel in the morning to put in your brain so that it can start reactivating what's going to happen throughout your life. In life, it's about, you can see it in two ways. Like everything goes bad or everything is a miracle. And if I have that choice, I rather believe that I can see life through that everything, it's a miracle, it's a good thing. Like I told you about this experience that I had, if it wouldn't been for that, it wouldn't have been the big push that I needed in order to go into my business.
Yeah.
Because I had been building my business for a long, long time, little by little, and be scared not to have a paycheck. And because of that experience, I had to move from cities actually, but it gave me the opportunity of a lifetime to go into a city that opened up my worldview in other dimensions. So it turned out to be a good thing because I chose to, right?
Yeah.
So because of those gratitudes, every morning I do my gratitude journal. I if I don't have time, mentally I do my gratitude journal. And at night I close my eyes, and that is what I put. I install good things in my brain. And I need that because I work every day with people. I'm the hope for other people, right?
Yeah.
So I need to be in a good mental state in order to be able to be there for other people.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't been able to be consistent at night, and I'm working on that. That's something I'm working on because I know it's so important to for your own well-being to go to sleep with, to have those thoughts in your head and not the stress of the day, but what are you grateful for? So I completely understand.
Yeah. And to add to that, I always leave a Post-it by my bed table because we go to bed and it's like, oh my God, I forgot to send that email. Oh, I forgot to send that proposal. Oh, I forgot to do this. And then I just grab my little Post-it, write it there and put it in there. And it's like all taken care of. I'll take care of it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And then I go and do my gratitude.
It's so interesting how that step of just writing something down, it gives your brain that alleviation that, okay, it's written down. I don't have to think about it anymore. Yeah. And you would think, okay, just because I wrote it down doesn't mean I'm not going to still think about it, but it somehow it works.
Well, it's because we always fear that we're going to forget, right?
Yeah,
and knowing that you put it in a place that you're going to come back tomorrow and know that it's there, it guarantees you not to be fearful that you're going to forget.
That's true.
So I always have my Post-its in there. And then in the morning, I got my Post-it and I bring it over to my desk. And it's like, okay, I need to take care of these things first. And I take care of them.
Oh, I love that. That's a great tip for people listening. Is there a song that you'll listen to when you need a little confidence or energy boost?
Well, talking about songs, maybe it's not necessarily that I have a song for boosting myself. I like bachata music, salsa music. That gets me in a very nice mood. It's interesting that people invite me to karaoke and it's like, Yvette, I know you sing a little bit. Can you sing a song? And it's like, I don't know any songs. I don't know any lyrics. He said, what is it that you listen to? I listen to salsa bachata because it gets me in a nice mood, but I don't even hear the words. Mm-hmm. I only hear the music. But talking about songs, I have an entire list of songs that have to do with conflict. It's so, humanistic to have conflict. And as you know, I teach at several universities and I teach undergraduate and master's degree students. And that's one of the things that I play with them, to bring in new songs, especially the new ones that I probably have not here because it's new generation songs. But I show them like very old and goodies, like 60, 70 songs. And these are songs that talk about conflict resolution. And I play them and I have a whole list of that. And then I ask the students, bring that and I give them points for bringing new songs and stuff like that. And we play them a little bit in the class and I teach through that. And I say, what is it that he's trying to, or she's trying to say? What is it that person is looking forward to receive and blah, blah, blah.
Is there a song you can think of that's on the playlist off the top of your head?
Oh my goodness. Gosh, there is what is it? Which song? Let's see. You caught me off guard, to be honest with you. But I have a whole list. But there's so many songs that talk about conflict and stuff like that. There's also a lot of great songs that society has developed in the past just to address societal conflict that exists as well.
True.
In songs and music, it's a way to conflict resolution as well, to conflict management. But because what I can remember, there's a very famous song in Mexico that talks about it's a very nice musical type of song, but embedded in that, it is a proclamation or insinuation that something is not going well in the politics. But because people could not say verbally or accuse politicians or write things on newsletters or newspapers, they will develop these songs.
Yeah.
And at least that is conflict management, right? Because not all conflict can be resolved. And I am not here telling you that everything can be resolved. But learning how to manage things can give you a way into a better life instead of just keeping that toxicity in your body.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find it really interesting to hear like songs or even movies, like some movies that have an underlying theme that's not obvious in what's happening on the screen, but it's there. And if you really look into what's going on, they're talking about that. And same with the music. It's always interesting to hear that there's actually a different story that you're not hearing when you listen.
Exactly, because sometimes you hear the lyrics, you like it, you don't even know exactly what they're talking about,
right?
But it's there, I'm trying to come up with the name of one song at least, but well,
maybe you can share.
I didn't get my vitamins today.
Oh no,
my brain vitamins, but I do have a list.
We have show notes, so if you maybe could share one or two after by email to me, and I'll just include them in the show notes. So
yes, and I will include that other song that I'm talking about. That it's a very emblematical song that it's actually traveled worldwide. But it's a Mexican song, and it means that they're complaining about the government, but they couldn't complain that bad, so they created a fun song with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be great. Is there something under $100 or around $100 that you've bought in the last year or so that has made a difference in your life in some way?
Let's see, less than $100. I made the difference. My goodness, you just go to Amazon. There's so many great things, especially, I'm an organizer. I used
Mhm.
to have a lot of OCD. I have been getting better, but I always go to Amazon and I like to buy these little gadgets to organize things.
Mhm.
And in that organizing things for me, it's nice. It's something that brings me joy. And but I don't recall one thing that, I have been trying to not to buy a lot of things
Yeah.
because I've been trying, I've been traveling more in going and doing workshops, trainings, and then traveling a little bit. And that has allowed me to buy less.
Yeah. No, that's a fair answer. That's
Mhm.
definitely
You know,
something that
may,
I've,
maybe what I can think about is it's some bags that you buy to put on your luggage that you zip them all and then the clothes become smaller. That could be
yeah.
one thing that has brought me a lot of joy, especially being women and traveling. You know how it is.
Yeah. Do you find that helps with wrinkling? Does it keep it from wrinkling as well if you put it in those bags?
I think so because the bags are made from these materials that is being used for parachuting.
Oh,
It's
yeah. Yeah.
very, very soft material. And when I put it in there, nothing happens to it. And then I tend to buy clothes that I'm not gonna, that I don't have to iron.
Yeah. Yeah. I love when I find something that I like that is that type of material because that's
Yeah.
it always goes in the dryer first, and then if worst case
Mhm.
scenario, I'll pull out the iron. But
Mhm.
is there a book that, besides your book, obviously, is there a book that you've read recently that you would recommend to the audience? It can be fiction or nonfiction, something that would be worth their time.
Well, I've been reading a lot of marketing books lately, especially to market my business, but and reading a lot of articles.
Hmm.
And recently, and actually, I'm also writing an article about how is it that companies ended up bringing leaders to a higher level, and these are toxic leaders.
Hmm.
And we already talked about that. And then I'm going to be writing an article about that as well. And I have a newsletter in LinkedIn that I sent and also a newsletter that I send in if people sign up in my website. But it's about that. It's about really putting into perspective: is it worthwhile to have these type of leaders? Do they masquerade the fact that they're bringing in revenue when money is going off the drain in so many different ways?
Yeah, that's an important. You don't. Yeah, I don't see many articles come up about that side of things, and
Mhm.
it's so important to have that realization that it's not all about the top line, and so many people get hung up on the top line and
Yeah.
don't think about everything that causes impact to the bottom line, which I mean, your business can't exist
Yeah.
without.
And then another book that I listen to whenever I'm walking and doing that, I just want to make sure I tell you the right one is Decoding Greatness.
Mm,
That's an amazing book. It's called Decoding Greatness.
okay. Well, we'll also add that in the show notes for everybody to check out. So, Yvette, I thank you for your time. We know we went over a little bit, and I appreciate you giving us all of this great information. I really would like everybody to check out your book. You are officially in everybody's Hype Squad now. Is there one piece of advice or words of inspiration that you would leave everybody with before we end today?
I think be kind to yourself.
Mm,
Be kind to yourself because we have been forgetting that.
yeah.
I see that a lot, especially because we have been dealing with so much difficulty, the pandemic. Sometimes we don't even know that we have burnout, that we have gone through so much change that it creates a lot of emotion, depression, unfortunately. But be kind to yourself and be aware that everybody in the society had been dealing with so much difficulty that we need to also be kind to ourselves. Don't forget to do
Yeah.
that.
Yep, so true, so true. Great words to end our conversation with. So if everybody wants to reach out to you, or if anybody wants to reach out to you listening, is LinkedIn the best way? Your website? Like what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can Google my name, Yvette Durazo, and they're gonna, I have a website under my name, and then that would lead you to my personal website and put my consulting website. There's a whole bunch of YouTube videos that I put out there. LinkedIn, I put a lot of content to help out the community through your post, podcast. They can probably look me up as well if you're going to put the links.
Yes, of course. I will add the links and I'll also provide a link to your newsletter that you mentioned and some of the other things that we talked about. Those will all be in the show notes, and I'll provide you that link as well. Well, great. Well, thank you, Yvette. Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you. And I look forward to hearing what you've got going on and staying in touch.
Will do.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Michelle again. If you enjoyed this conversation, hit subscribe so you don't miss out on our weekly episodes. And if you're really feeling it, please leave a review. We'd love to have your support. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter where we share things we're excited about, things we found funny or inspiring, and must-read leadership videos and articles we came across that week. You can subscribe by going to www.thebosstrack.com/weeklyjoy. That's www.thebosstrack.com/weeklyjoy. Drop in your email and you'll get the very next one. Thanks for listening.